Hello everyone, welcome to our video today. Today we'll be doing the introduction to human anatomy, and we'll start by defining some few terms in this lecture. So, as you can see that image at the background, you can be able to see it's a sperm fertilizing an ovum. Then there is an embryo that is formed until a fully formed fetus is formed. So that is embryology. That is one of the things that we are going to discuss in this session. And so this anatomy made easy. Feel free to like, comment, share, and subscribe. So we start by defining what is anatomy, as you can see there. So anatomy is a study of structure of human body parts. So study of the upper limb, study of the lower limb, study of the liver, the lungs, the heart. That is anatomy, study of the structure of human body parts. And then if you want now to study the functions of the anatomy, that will be physiology. So physiology is a study of body functions, study of the human body parts that we'll talk about. So physiology study of body functions, anatomy study of the structure of the body parts. So physiology includes anatomy. And then under anatomy, it will be further divided into gross anatomy, histology, and embryology. So in histology, we'll have the study of microscopic structure of the tissues. So if we take one part of the body, for example, we take the liver, we want to study the cells, the structure of the cells, the structure of how it looks like. So that is the microscopic structure of tissues, which is called histology, study of cell, study of tissues. That is histology. Histology is a broad term also. It includes cytology and other things. And then finally, we'll have embryology, of which now embryology is a study of the development of an embryo from fertilization to birth, as we can see in this image that is on the background. So study of fertilization here that is taking place here until all the way you can see you have multiplications of cells and then development of this embryo to give us a fully formed fetus. That is embryology. So embryology includes development of various organs, development of the whole fetus, and development of even the various systems of the body. So those are the basic terms that you're supposed to know: anatomy, physiology, histology, and embryology. Anatomy being the study of the structure of human body parts. Structure is the important one there. Physiology, study of human body functions. Histology, study of microscopic structure of tissues. Embryology is the development of tissues, as you can see there. So how is anatomy covered? Anatomy covered is covered in a very important fashion that is unique. You can cover it as regional anatomy. So in regional anatomy is a study of structures of the human body by covering specific regions. So for example, you might want to cover the upper limb alone. You might like to cover or study the shoulder region of the upper limb alone, or you might like to study the abdomen alone, so that these regions, the body is divided into various regions. And this regional anatomy is the one that is commonly used in clinical practice and in physical examinations. While if you're not having regional anatomy, what will you be having? You'll be having systemic anatomy. And systemic anatomy is now study of body parts, covering it systems by system. So study of body by systems is known as systemic anatomy. So for example, we'll have the nervous system, we'll have the digestive system, we'll have the male reproductive system. These are various systems. So if you want to study anatomy according to systemic wise, you'll cover according to those systems, which are about 12 of them. Then this systemic anatomy is one that is found in most academic textbooks. So the two ways in which anatomy is covered, regional anatomy and systemic anatomy. In some universities, they usually cover it in regional anatomy, including the University of Nairobi. They usually cover it as regional anatomy. Okay, so we'll try to delve into regional anatomy. And the first thing that we talk about is upper limb. So in upper limb, you have various regions. You have the shoulder region. So this is a shoulder region, as you can see in this image. Then you have the back. Back is now the posterior aspect of the body, of the thorax, that's the back. Then you'll have the pectoral region. This is a pectoral region here. And then you'll have the arm. This is the arm, this is a forearm, and then this is a hand. So as you get to learn more into anatomy, you'll understand that these regions will have muscles, will have nerves, will have blood vessels, and it will be divided to various dermatomes. And that's the reason why it will be a region, and that region now will be studied further. So for example, you might find that this pectoral region will be containing muscles such as the pectoralis major muscle. So that pectoralis major muscle, it will have its innervation, it will have its blood supply, its action, and other things. So this is just introduction of anatomy. So just to show us that the upper limb has those regions, shoulder region, back, pectoral region, arm, forearm, and the hand. And what are some of the bones of this upper limb? You can see we have the clavicle, we have the scapula here, we have this bone known as humerus, and then you have these two bones, ulna and radius, and then the hand has about these bones that you can see here. So you have the carpals, the metacarpals, and the phalanges. So the scapula is one of the bones of the back. Then you can see the humerus is one of the bones of the arm, but now the humerus, the head of humerus and the scapula usually form the shoulder joint. And then you can see now the radius and the ulna and the distal end of the humerus, they usually form the elbow joint. Not to forget that radius and ulna are bones of the forearm, and then bones of the hand, you can see them there. Okay, the other part of regional anatomy is lower limb, as you can see. So lower limb has a bit of some parts. It has gluteal region. So gluteal region is this region that you can be able to see here. So posteriorly, this part, the gluteal region that contains now the gluteus maximus muscle, gluteus medius, gluteus minimus muscle, and other lateral rotator muscles. So that's the gluteal region. The other part of the lower limb is a thigh. So this is a thigh. This is a posterior aspect of the thigh. This is the anterior aspect of the thigh. And then this will be the medial aspect of the thigh. So the thigh will be divided into three: anterior aspect, medial aspect, and posterior aspect. And then the leg is the leg here, anterior aspect of the leg is the posterior aspect of the leg. It will be divided into two, anterior and posterior. And then you'll have the foot. This is a foot. This is a dorsum of the foot. And then you will have now the plantar aspect of the foot. Of course, each region will contain muscles, dermatomes, innervation, blood supply, and other things. So yes, some of the bones of the lower limb, as you can see here. Here we have the pelvis, and then you have the hip joint being formed by the femur and the pelvis. Then you can see the lower end, the distal aspect of the femur, and the upper aspect of tibia and fibula. They help in formation of the knee joint together with this bone known as the patella bone. And then you'll have tibia and fibula, they are bones of the leg, of which now together with the talus, they usually form the ankle joint. And then you have tarsals, metatarsals, and phalanges being bones of the foot. So once again, bones of the lower limb, you can see you have the pelvis, you have the femur, you have the patella bone, you have the tibia and fibula, and then you have tarsals, metatarsals, and phalanges. So those are bones of the lower limb. And then as you can see, we talked about dividing the thigh into three parts: the anterior aspects, medial aspect, and posterior aspect. So here we are looking at anterior aspect of the lower limb. So you have a cross section here. So once you have a cross section here, you can see you have a femur here. So this is our femur. So the anterior aspect will be this. So these are anterior aspects of the thigh. The posterior aspect of the thigh will be this, and then this is a medial aspect of the thigh. Of course, each compartment has various bones, has various muscles and blood vessels in it. And then on this, you can be able to appreciate this is a cross section of the leg. In the cross section of the leg, you can see two bones actually, tibia and fibula. So the anterior aspect of the leg is this one, then the posterior aspect of the leg is this one. So you can see even the muscles of the posterior aspect of the leg. So talk about soleus, gastrocnemius, and other muscles, but that one will cover it deeply when we cover each portion by itself. Then the other part of regional anatomy that we need to know is neuroanatomy, of which now neuroanatomy is divided into two. You'll have central nervous system comprising of the brain. This is the brain, the whole of the brain here. It will comprise of the brain and the spinal cord. You can be able to see that there. So that's the brain and the spinal cord. Then you have the peripheral nervous system, of which now the peripheral nervous system will contain the cranial nerves and the spinal nerves, as you can see in this. So central nervous system comprises of the brain, of which now the brain we'll see later will contain various parts, but majorly the brain and the spinal cord. They form the central nervous system. While peripheral nervous system is formed by cranial nerves, should be coming from the brain, especially now the brainstem part of the brain. And the spinal nerves should be coming from just from the word spinal cord, spinal nerves. They be coming from the spinal cord. So all these that you can see here are spinal nerves. Then cranial nerves will be coming from the brainstem. And yes, that's the brain. This brain will contain various aspects. First of all, this is a cerebrum. You can see this is a cerebrum, the one that is color coded. You have the frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, and the temporal lobe. So, are parts of cerebrum. Here we have the cerebellum, and then this is a brainstem. So this brainstem is the one that will give us the cranial nerves. Cranial nerves are actually 12 in number. With the first two not coming from the brainstem, they usually come from the cerebrum itself. Then the brainstem gives us the remaining 10 cranial nerves. So that's majorly the brain. But we'll delve that more when we cover more neuroanatomy as regional anatomy. So that's a portion, introduction to neuroanatomy, of how neuroanatomy works. But we'll have some few slides coming later. Then we go to head and neck region. So head and neck region, as you can see in that image, so this is a head. This is a head comprising of the face and the rest, and then you can see the neck. So the head and neck contains of the orbital region, the region around the eye, that is the orbital region. Then you'll have the face, the whole of this is the face. So the face, as you can see, it will contain even muscles of facial expression, the ones that enable you to make certain facial expressions. Then you'll have the temporal region. This will be the temporal region here. Then you'll have the oral region. This is the oral region. The nasal region will be here. It will contain other regions such as the parotid region here. And then for the neck, it will contain of the anterior part of the neck and the posterior part of the neck, of which now this anterior part of the neck and posterior part of the neck are further divided into triangles, as you'll see when we'll be covering head and neck. And then larynx and pharynx are now part of head and neck in anatomy. So once again, the skull is part of the head. As you can see, it will contain various bones, the frontal bone, the parietal bone, the occipital bone, the temporal bone, and then it will also contains now other bones of the facial region, the maxilla. We have the mandible there, and then you can be able to appreciate the palatine bone, the vomer is there, the nasal, the lacrimal bones are just some facial bones, and then you have cranial vault bones. This one will be covered more when you'll be doing the neck regions. Yes, a good representation of the neck region. These are anterior neck triangles, and anterior neck triangles. So we're supposed to know of head and neck region, the boundaries that divide into two, anterior and posterior, and then the various triangles. For example, you can see in the anterior triangle, we have some triangle, we have some mandibular triangle, carotid triangle, and muscular triangle, usually 4 triangles. Then posteriorly, we usually have this lateral this occipital triangle, suboccipital triangle, and then you'll also have subclavian triangle. Subclavian triangle and occipital triangle. Those are the 2 triangles. Occipital triangle and subclavian triangle. Yes. For the thorax, ideally, that's simple. We've been able to know that thorax is covered in most part of the indication. So thorax, as any other part, will contain the rib cage, will contain the lungs, the heart, and some part of the trachea. So the thorax, in between the lungs, so for example, you can see here we have lungs, 2 lungs. This space is known as mediastinum. So we can tell that this mediastinum will contain the heart itself. Then the mediastinum contains the heart, and then on the lateral aspect of the mediastinum will contain the lungs. So these lungs will be found inside the rib cage. And then this rib cage is formed by ribs, of course. You can see the 12 ribs. And then you'll have a sternum bone anteriorly, and then posteriorly you'll have the thoracic vertebrae. They form like a protection to the visceral organs, which are the lungs, the heart, and the esophagus, the trachea, and the other structures. And then, of course, we'll have a diaphragm, the muscle that contracts and relaxes to enable breathing in and breathing out. That is inspiration and expiration. As you can see here, a good representation of the thorax. So now we'll be studying regional anatomy specifically for the thorax. You're supposed to know the blood supply to the heart and everything. Nervous system, it's supplied to the heart, the various parts, the chambers of the heart, how it contracts, the type of muscle it contains. That will be covered more. We'll be doing the thorax. Here is just an introduction to the thorax. So mediastinum. Ideally, you're supposed to know that the mediastinum is divided into 2 parts: superior mediastinum and inferior mediastinum. Contents of each will be covered later with the thorax. Then the lungs are 2. We're supposed to know innervation of each, the segments, the impressions, and then the diaphragm. You're supposed to know its innervation, action, and even what happens when you have now paralysis of the diaphragm. Most importantly, when you'll be covering the diaphragm, during the thorax, you're supposed to know the 3 major openings and how they relate the structures of the abdomen into the thorax, or structures of the thorax into the abdomen, because it is a diaphragm separating the thorax and the abdomen. So here we go to the abdomen. So the abdomen, as you can tell, this is the abdomen. So from the thorax, you go to the abdomen. It will contain the structures of the digestive system, organs of the digestive system, organs of the urinary system, and even organs of the reproductive system. But before then, anterior to the abdomen, you'll have anterior abdominal wall with muscles. Posterior to the abdomen, you have posterior abdominal wall with muscles. And even posterior abdominal wall has lumbar vertebrae, and then it will also have muscles. So each will be covered more when we be talking about now the various muscles, the innervation, the action, and their blood supply. So what are some of the organs of the digestive system, as you can see? So you can see the liver, you can see the stomach, spleen, gallbladder, and now we have small intestine and the large intestine. Structures of the urinary system, we usually have the bladder, the ureters, the kidneys. Structures of the reproductive system, in females will have the ovaries, as you can see in this. So the structures are, or the organs specifically, have the liver, the stomach, the spleen, the small intestine, the pancreas, the large intestine, the kidneys for the urinary system, the ureters, the urethra, the bladder, the ovaries in females, some of the structures that we need to know. And now we go to the perineum. So perineum is the last part of regional anatomy if we go to systemic anatomy. So in the perineum, usually cover pelvis, and then you cover the male reproductive perineum, then female reproductive perineum. So the pelvis, just a bone. Of course, you have muscle attachment, it has various parts such as the ilium, the sternum, the pubis, and the ischium. So the three, ilium, ischium, and pubis, usually form the hip bone. And then two hip bones join together in the sacrum give us a pelvis. So you have a pelvic inlet, which is here. You can have a pelvic inlet, and then on the lower side, you usually have the pelvic outlet. And even this perineum will have diaphragms, two diaphragms actually, the inner diaphragm and outer diaphragm of the perineum. And yes, now we go to the male reproductive system and the female reproductive system, which is just covered as part of the perineum. So the male reproductive system contains the testes, which are two. You go to the vas deferens, semina of the cycles, you have the prostate gland, then you have this urethra here. Of course, we have the bulbourethral glands, prostate glands, and the seminal vesicles in the reproductive system. Of course, in the testes, I will cover more. It will contain seminiferous tubules and epididymis. For the female reproductive system, you can appreciate it will contain the ovaries, we have the fallopian tube, the uterus, we have the cervix, the vagina. And then for the external genitalia, now we have the labia majora, the labia minora, the vestibular glands. That's for the external genitalia. What you're seeing here is internal genitalia. For this male reproductive system, the external genitalia will have the penis, the testicles, just and the scrotum being part of the external genitalia. Then the rest, such as the menor vesicles, the prostate, those will be like structures of the internal genitalia. And yes, now we go to regional. Okay, we just finished systemic regional anatomy. Now we are going to systemic anatomy. In this systemic anatomy, we'll be expected to know a couple of few things. And yes, for the systemic anatomy, the first part that you're going to start with, we're going to start with the skeletal system. And so by just the word itself, the skeleton of the body. So which consists of bones, cartilages, joints, and ligaments. And interestingly, the body has 206 bones. Of course, the bones should be divided into exoskeleton on the body longitudinal axis, which is the skull now, the rib cage containing the sternum, the ribs, and the thoracic vertebrae. Then you have the vertebral column and the sacrum. Those are the bones of the exoskeleton. Talk of skull, the bones of the rib cage, the vertebral column, and the sacrum. Then for the appendicular skeleton, so are all the other parts of the body, all the bones of the body apart from those in the exoskeleton. So we'll talk about the bones that form the shoulder girdle, the bones of the upper limb, that is arm, forearm, and the hand. And then talk about the hip bones, the pelvic girdle, the leg, the bones of the leg, that is femur, the thigh, femur, the leg, that is the fibula now, and the tibia, and then the bones of the foot. So all those bones will be the appendicular skeleton. But the body has 206 bones. What is the function of this skeletal system? One of them is support. They offer support to the body. Then they offer protection to visceral organs. So for example, the brain. The skull offers support to the brain. The lungs and the heart are protected by the rib cage. Then with help from the muscles, the vascular system, they enable movement. So the bones and the muscles, they enable that movement from one place to another. And then you'll have blood production. So in blood production, you'll have that inside the bones, especially the long bones such as femur, we have bone marrow. That bone marrow usually produce blood in them. So blood cells will be coming from the bone marrow. Then you have the same bones, such as the teeth now. There's the bones themselves, they act as storage for minerals such as calcium, phosphate. And then they also store fat. So these are some of the bones that you're supposed to know. We've been mentioning them in other parts, in other regions. So the skull is the, we'll have the sternum, we'll have the clavicle, we'll have the scapula, you have the ribs, is the pelvis, the femur, the tibia and the fibula, the talus, the phalanges, the metatarsals, all those bones. Maybe an interesting fact is that when a child is born, the child has about 270 bones. But now with time, some of them fuse with other bones, and that's the reason why the bones reduce up to 6 bones. Another interesting fact is that the bones usually ossify, like they develop even after birth, and that's the reason why you can find a person who grows up to at the age of 25. That's the time now the growth usually stops. 25, 26. Yes, so the other part of musculoskeletal system is the muscular skeleton, the muscular system, sorry. We've already covered the skeletal system. So now you're covering the muscular system. So for the muscular system is responsible for movements, posture and head generation. So now you're moving and now you're having that posture and doing that heat generation. It's that action of the muscles when they're contracting and relaxing. And human body has 3 types of muscles: skeletal muscles, cardiac muscles, and smooth muscles. So you can see them there. So skeletal muscles are found in almost every part of the body. So everything that you can see in the various regions, for example, the muscles of the upper limb, the muscles of the lower limb, the muscles of the thorax, As long as they are not covering any organ, they are skeletal muscles. So those are the ones that contract and relax to enable extension and flexion, abduction. Those actions are due to skeletal muscles. Then cardiac muscles are only found in the heart, as you can see in this image. Cardiac muscles are found only in the heart. And then smooth muscles are found majorly in visceral organs. So the large intestine, small intestine, the bladder, the stomach, they'll contain smooth muscles. So smooth muscles, they can contract and relax under our autonomic nervous system. We'll see that nervous system in a few minutes. And then what are the functions of these muscles? So movements and posture, that's skeletal muscles. Heat production, skeletal muscles. Pumping of blood, that's a function of cardiac muscle that is found in the heart. Involuntary body functions such as defecation, such as peristalsis, that's a function of smooth muscles in visceral organs. And then joint stability, that's a function of skeletal muscles. So that's a brief overview of the muscular system. You can appreciate this. The heart contains cardiac muscles. We have the smooth muscles that are found in the various viscera, except the heart. And then you have the skeletal muscles that are found in almost each and every part of the body. So any muscle that is attached to a bone, that is a skeletal muscle. So each type of muscle has specific properties, specific characteristics that are just specific to each of those muscles. And that will be covered more in histology, that will be covered more in now covering the specific muscles when we'll be doing now the regional anatomy. We go to cardiovascular system. We've alluded a little bit to it. So from the word cardiovascular, so cardio means heart and then vascular means blood vessels. So cardio is from cardiac, gives us cardiac muscles. So the heart, the cardiovascular system, does the function of transporting blood, which contains nutrients, gases, hormones, and waste products in the body. So in that blood, will be nourishing various organs, will be nourishing the muscles, the visceral organs, as well as removing the waste, as well as transporting hormones to the various target organs. And actually, those are the components. Majorly, there are three major components. As you can see, with the central one being the heart, which is divided into various chambers. So the heart is a primary component of the cardiovascular system. Now you go to blood vessels, which are further divided into three. You'll have arteries, color-coded in red. Then you have veins, color-coded in blue in this image. And then you have blood now, the fluid that is transporting all these things. So that is a cardiovascular system. Now, when you go specifically to the thorax, we'll be covering the heart deeply. So talk about the chambers, the valves, the inlet and the outlets, and how contraction happens. And then we talk about histology of blood vessels, because the arteries and the veins are different in terms of the size of the lumen, the walls, the thickness of the walls, the blood it transports, and even now the tissue capillaries that you can see here. So these are the tissue capillaries, the arteries, the veins, and this is now the circulatory system in biology. In biology, we call it circulatory system, but now in anatomy, we call it the cardiovascular system. Now we go to just a system that is almost similar to the cardiovascular system, is a lymphatic system. So the lymphatic system is almost known as immune system. It's a component of the immune system. Why? It helps maintain body fluid balance, but the most important thing is that it helps the immune system to fight infections. So that's the reason why it's almost known as immune system. So some of the components of this lymphatic system, of course, it has a fluid known as lymphatic fluid or lymph. That lymphatic fluid will be transported in vessels known as lymphatic vessels. Those lymphatic vessels, they will be draining into lymph nodes and lymphoid organs. So for example, in these organs, in this image, we can see these are lymphatic vessels. These lymphatic vessels are draining into lymph nodes of the various parts of the body. So these are lymph nodes, these are various lymph nodes, these are various lymph nodes. And then these lymph nodes, they can drain into some larger lymphatic vessels such as thoracic duct. And yes, now we also have other lymphoid organs that now will develop or will form the cells of the lymphatic system. So you'll have the spleen being one of the organs of the lymphatic system, the thymus is here, the tonsils, and the bone marrow. So when no, maybe you hear someone talking about they have been diagnosed with tonsillitis, that means inflammation of the tonsils. That means there were some infections which were trapped in the tonsils, and so the tonsils inflamed, tonsillitis. And that image shows it better. We have the tonsils being one of the lymphoid organs, the thymus. Then we have the lymph nodes, the spleen being the largest lymphatic organ, the lymph nodes there, and then you have even the bone marrow, a long bone such as femur, humerus, and other bones. So that is the lymphatic system helps fight infections. We'll go now to the respiratory system. So respiratory system is related to cardiovascular system because of that gaseous exchange. So the respiratory system is primarily responsible for gaseous exchange. It's primarily responsible for gaseous exchange. So it brings in oxygen and then exchanges it with carbon dioxide that is coming out from tissues. So blood brings in waste from body parts, from tissues. Then the same blood now takes out this oxygen and transports it to other body parts. So that's how respiratory system and the cardiovascular system usually work hand in hand. And so the components of this respiratory system, we'll start with the nasal cavity here. Sometimes even the oral cavity is part of the respiratory system because you can breathe using your mouth, your oral cavity. So nasal cavity, oral cavity, then you go to the pharynx, commonly known as the throat, then the larynx, in layman's language known as the voice box. Then that part, the laryngopharynx, that is responsible for respiration. Then you go to trachea. That's a trachea. Then from the trachea, you go to the bronchi, you go to the bronchioles, and then you go to the lungs, which will contain all the alveoli. And then not to forget that you have a diaphragm here. So the diaphragm is that now will contract and relax, altering the volume of the lungs, bringing in the pressure difference in the lungs. And that's the difference between inhalation and exhalation. So those are the components of the respiratory system: nasal cavity, pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchi and bronchioles, of course, it should be contained in the lungs. Then the lungs will contain the alveoli, now the functional unit, the one that is responsible for the gaseous section. That's where gaseous section usually happens. And then you'll have the diaphragm. And this one shows us now the components of the respiratory system, starting with even the sinuses, the frontal layer sinuses, the sphenoidal layer sinuses, the pharynx, the oral cavity, the nasal cavity, the larynx and its cartilages. Talk about even the voice box, the vocal cords will be there, the trachea, and the rest of the structure that is described. So those are components of the respiratory system. We go to a very important system next to the respiratory system is the nervous system. So this is a communication system of the body. So it controls the body and also enables communication between various organs. So that's the nervous system is the one that enables the coordination. As you can see there, we attached this more neuroanatomy as a region. So once again, the nervous system will comprise of central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. But before then, what's the function of this nervous system? It receives, processes, and responds to internal and external stimuli through the help of these nerve cells. So we'll have specialized nerve cells that will receive, special nerve cells that will process, and special nerve cells that will respond, will effect that to the effectors now. So it will detect a stimuli through the sensor, through the receptors, and then do the coordination. So if you can be able to put your finger on fire, that awareness that your finger is on fire is through the function of the nervous system. It receives a stimuli, processes it, responds, and then sends information to a muscle, maybe to contract or maybe to extend or flex, so that you can be able to remove your finger from the fire. And so it has two major divisions: central nervous system, as we talked about, in the brain and the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system that comprises of spinal nerves and cranial nerves. So peripheral nervous system is further divided into somatic nervous system, autonomic nervous system, and enteric nervous system, of which now this enteric nervous system is a special part which is just for the digestive system alone. But the somatic nervous system controls voluntary muscles. Autonomic nervous system is one that enables the it's just the one that determines your well-being. So for example, the sympathetic part of the autonomic nervous system is one that enables you to, so when you see a snake, you jump or you run away. So that is fight or flight mode of autonomic nervous system, so sympathetic nervous system. So enables you to become aware of the situation that you are in and you do something. So that is fight or flight mode. That is for the sympathetic nervous system. For the parasympathetic nervous system, so it's opposite of sympathetic. So the other one you are fight and flight. In parasympathetic, you are rest and digest. So you can be able to rest, you're just calm in a calm mood. Then if you're in a calm mood, that's the time now you can be able to digest food. That's the time now you can be able to enable the functions of the visceral organs to happen normally. So rest and digest, parasympathetic system. Fight and flight, that is sympathetic nervous system. So all under the umbrella of autonomic nervous system. So that's peripheral nervous system, somatic nervous system, autonomic nervous system with sympathetic and parasympathetic. Then we'll have the enteric nervous system, the one that is now some more special, the one that regulates the digestive system. How? It regulates the digestive system given the fact that you usually have one part of, so for example, you have the esophagus. The bolus is going down from the mouth to the stomach. So how do you able to control like 3 or 4 boluses to control and relax at different times through the esophagus that you can be able to move downwards? That is the function of peristalsis. So peristalsis now is controlled majorly by this enteric nervous system. So telling one part of the esophagus to contract and then telling the other part of the esophagus to relax. So that coordinated movement is function of the enteric nervous system. And that's a flow chart showing us the nervous system. So you can be able to see It has two major components: central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. Central nervous system has brain and a spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system will contain autonomic nervous system, somatic nervous system, which will know autonomic nervous system will contain sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system. Somatic controls voluntary muscles. Then the special branch that we talked about, the enteric nervous system, the one that regulates the movements of the digestive system. Okay, closely related to the nervous system. So the nervous system enables like a very fast action. It's very fast nervous system. So a slower communication is brought by endocrine system. So endocrine system is related to hormones. So maybe you've heard about estrogen, you've heard about testosterone, you've heard about vitamin D being one of the hormones and such. So that is related to endocrine system. And so the endocrine system is a glandular system that produces and secretes hormones. And those hormones are going to target organs. So for example, it's going to the liver, it's going to the lungs, going to the heart, or to the muscles as a target organs. And they are being carried, those hormones are being carried in the bloodstream to regulate the body functions of those specific target organs. And so, why are you doing that? Why are you secreting hormones to enable body functions, to regulate body functions such as growth, for example, now growth hormone, metabolism, a hormone like cortisol, reproduction, links with testosterone, estrogen, and mood, hormones like dopamine, serotonin will help in that regard. And some of the examples of glands that we need to know, we actually have pituitary gland, which is a master gland. Then we even have hypothalamus. We have the pineal gland on the posterior aspect of the hypothalamus. We have the thyroid and parathyroid glands on the neck region. On the thorax, superior and mediastinum, we have the thymus. The pancreas is also an endocrine gland and an exocrine gland also. Then you have adrenal glands, the one that are just formed superior to the kidneys. Then you have the ovary in females, testicles in males, and then placenta during pregnancy in females. So some of the endocrine glands that you're supposed to know. And now you can see some of the hormones that you're talking about. So I won't go deep into this because this one will be covered more I'll be covering specific regions. So for example, the hypothalamus will produce various releasing hormones. As you can see here, there's thyroid releasing hormone, cortisol releasing hormone, dopamine, and the rest. Thyroid T3, T4, calcitonin, parathyroid produces PTH. The liver, insulin growth factor. Adrenal gland produces androgens, epinephrine and norepinephrine. Kidneys produce those hormones there, and the testis produces androgens. And then on the other side, you can see the pineal gland produces melatonin, the one that now acts like enables you to wake. So it's the biological clock. Pituitary gland is a master gland, so produces a lot of hormones. So either stimulating hormones or inhibiting hormones. Then thymus produces thymopoietin, thymulin, and the rest. Stomach, you can see the hormones that are produced by the stomach. Gastrin, somatostatin, neuropeptide Y. Pancreas produces, importantly, insulin and glucagon. It also produces somatostatin. For the ovary and the placenta usually produces estrogens and progesterones. And then uterus, prolactin, and relaxin. So the functions of the endocrine system now will be related to those hormones produced by those endocrine glands. As you can see here, So it regulates growth and development. That's a function of growth hormone. Maintains homeostasis, the function of cortisol. Mood and behavior control. We talked about dopamine and serotonin. Metabolism control, cortisol. Controls reproductive functions. That is now the androgens and the testosterone, estrogen, progesterone. Regulates the sleep cycle, majorly the melatonin produced by pineal glands. And so for these functions of the endocrine system, it's not like just one hormone. You'll find like two hormones are doing this almost similar function, but they are produced by two different organs. So they usually overlap, but you have major hormones that do specific functions. For example, cortisol, metabolism, epinephrine and norepinephrine. Those are actually neurotransmitters that enable that function of communication and fight and flight mode in sympathetic nervous system. So just to mention the functions of the endocrine system, some of the glands that you're supposed to know, and what they usually do. For the gastrointestinal system, as you can see here, it's more structure that we cover in the digestive system in biology. So this gastrointestinal system, you can see, the components. So we talk about the mouth that contains the teeth. Talk about the pharynx, esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, which contains now the duodenum, jejunum, and the ileum. And then you go to the large intestine, comprised of the appendix, the cecum, the ascending colon, transverse and descending colon. Also, you have sigmoid colon, then the rectum, and then finalize up with anus. You'll have endocrine glands that will be related to, or glands that are related to the gastrointestinal system. You start with the salivary glands, of which there are three major salivary glands: sublingual gland, submandibular gland, and the parotid gland. So this one will be related majorly. The mouth, like they'll be draining their secretions, their saliva and its components, the oral cavity, the mouth. Then you'll have the liver, the gallbladder, the pancreas, releasing their secretions into the duodenum, now to enhance digestion. So that's function of the glands of the GIT. So glands that are related to GIT have salivary glands, the three of them: sublingual, submandibular, and the parotid glands. Other glands, the liver, gallbladder, talk about the pancreas, will be related to gastrointestinal system. So for the functions, talk about ingestion, the mouth, mechanical digestion. So once you ingest the food, it will be broken down through the process of mastication in the oral cavity, that is the mouth. Then chemical digestion usually happens starting there. It usually starts in the mouth, but it will continue in the stomach and then finalize up in the small intestine. Then absorption of chemicals, that is now the nutrients, specifically absorption of nutrients, will be happening in the small intestine, especially duodenum, jejunum, and the ileum. Then elimination and defecation, that will be happening now in the anus and the rectum. So even storage will be happening in the rectum. Not to forget that water and mineral salts will also be absorbed in the small intestine and in large intestine. And then secretions of digestive enzymes and fluids, that will happen in majorly the stomach, the duodenum, the pancreas, the jejunum, the ileum. All those enzymes and fluids will be secreted in those parts, but we'll cover them deeply in our regional anatomy, specifically focusing on maybe the small intestine, the stomach. Yes. Storage and mixing of food. Of course, mixing and churning of food is a function of the stomach, and then storage will happen in the stomach and also in the rectum. We go to the urinary, which majorly is like a subsystem that is found in the excretory system. So excretory system will comprise the urinary system, the integumentary system, but majorly the excretory system, most of the components will be from the urinary system. And so the components will be kidneys, ureters, the bladder, and then the urethra. Of course, you can see the urethra in male. In males is long, and then in female it's short. That's one of the differences between a male urethra and a female urethra. So those are the components of the urinary system: kidneys, ureter, bladder, and the urethra. What are the functions of this urinary system? So, or maybe even excretory system, the function of excretion of waste products. So it happens in the kidneys, happens in the skin also. Regulation of fluids and electrolytes, that's majorly the functions of the kidney. So they enable filtration, they reabsorb nutrients, electrolytes, then they regulate blood pressure. That's a function of the kidneys. By telling that you need to reabsorb more water, you need to reduce reabsorption of water. That happens in the kidneys. Then through regulation of blood pressure, you will be regulating blood volume and osmolarity. So when now you will be regulating blood volume and osmolarity, you'll be regulating blood pressure. You'll also be regulating electrolytes and body fluids. Important. Then detoxification of blood. That's, remember, you have removal of, or maybe excretion of drugs, excretion of harmful chemicals in the kidneys. And then to finalize it, that will in the kidneys, you'll have hormone production. So hormones such as erythropoietin, that enables formation of blood that happens in the bone marrow. Renin, this renin helps in regulating blood pressure. And then vitamin D, that now regulates calcium metabolism, or maybe absorption in the stomach, in the digestive system, sorry. So that's hormone production that are produced, hormones that are produced in the kidneys. So that's urinary system, just a brief overview of the components and the function of the urinary system. We go to integumentary system. This integumentary system is a skin. So it majorly has three parts. The epidermis, the most outer part. So what you see, usually see the epidermis. Then you have the dermis, this is the dermis, and then you have a subcutaneous layer or the hypodermis. So epidermis, we'll see further, that has 5 layers, of which now we can go and check on those 5 layers. The dermis will comprise of blood vessels, comprise of some receptors. And also the epidermis will also contain a few of the receptors that will enable detection the sensations. The subcutaneous layer stores fat, and then larger blood vessels and nerves. And then this just shows now components of the skin will contain hair shaft, the hair, sebaceous gland that produces sebum, that is antiseptic. And then you can see now this erector pili muscle, the hair, and the sebaceous gland usually make the pilosebaceous unit. And then you can see now the hypodermis, just below the dermis, as there is a known as hypodermis. And then that's the integumentary system. Skin with 3 parts: epidermis, dermis, and hypodermis. And then now the specific components of the integumentary system. Now, for example, the hair follicles, the sweat glands, eccrine sweat glands, apocrine sweat glands, the mammary glands, the erector pili muscles, all those are just appendages. They're not appendages of the skin. What are the functions of this integumentary system? Most likely the skin. You have protection. So it protects, actually, the skin acts as a physical barrier to pathogens, so viruses and bacteria. Then temperature regulation, using appendages such as sebaceous glands, and this contraction of the erector pili muscles to just regulate, to alter the orientation of the hair follicles. Then sensations, it has receptors that is able to detect UV light. Then prevents water loss, just prevents water loss. Then vitamin D synthesis, which starts initially in the skin, then goes to the liver, then finalizes it in the kidneys. That's vitamin D synthesis. The process of vitamin D synthesis starts in the skin, goes to the liver, finalizes it in the kidneys. Excretion, of course, red glands, they help in that regard, cooling the body. Remember also, sweat will contain nitrogenous components, will be excreted in the integumentary, in the skin. And then wound healing and regeneration will happen in the, because it will contain macrophages that are specific to the skin, the Langerhans cells, will contain stem cells that enable wound healing and regeneration, and also through blood supply. And then appearance and communication. So how your skin looks, it also enables that communication and appearance to other people. Reproductive system, as we wrap it up, will contain two parts. So reproductive system is the one that is responsible for enabling humans to reproduce, ensuring continuity of species. So this is male reproductive system, as you can see here, comprising of the external and internal genitalia, talk about the testes, with seminiferous tubules, epididymis, vas deferens, talked about the prostate, talked about seminal vesicles, corpus, or the bulbourethral glands, the urethra, and the penis, as you can see here. In females, talked about the fallopian tube, ovary, the cervix, the vagina, the uterus. All those will be components of the reproductive system. So what are the functions? The functions of the reproductive system: production of gametes, that is sperms and ova. So through that, usually enables the process of fertilization if they meet during sexual intercourse. Then we have secretion of sex hormones such as testosterone by the testes, estrogen by the ovaries. Then fertilization, when you have sperms and the ova meeting together to allow continuity of life, then they support. For example, now the uterus, the placenta, they support embryo and fetus in females. Then transmission of genetic material from now in various species. In the male reproductive system, we consider the components we talked about them there. Maybe addition, you can see the scrotum and the various glands. So specific functions, as you can see there, you'll have production and delivery of sperms in the process of spermatogenesis. We'll have production of androgens, develops male secondary sexual characteristics. So yes, so apologies for that. Yeah, so we were talking about the male reproductive system, and we talked about the components specifically. Now study the scrotum, the testes, the epididymis, the vas deferens, the seminal vesicles with its ejaculatory ducts. So the vas deferens and the ejaculatory ducts actually forms the urethra, and then the urethra, which is very long in males, comes and empties its contents out through the penis, as you can see there. An important thing to see is that it will contain three major glands: seminal vesicles, the prostate, and the bulbourethral glands, which are now the corpus glands. Those are specifically for the male reproductive system. What are the functions? Produce and deliver sperms, as you can see there. Production of androgens, which now these androgens such as testosterone will enable the development of male secondary sexual characteristics. So depending on the voice, pubic hair, and even that masculine stature of males is due to the androgens. And then the glands. So for example, secretion of the prostate of the seminal vesicles will nourish the sperms. And then remember the process of production of sperms known as spermatogenesis that happens in the seminal vesicles. For the female reproductive system, the internal genitalia, as we talked about, the female internal genitalia will comprise of the ovary, fallopian tube, the uterus, the cervix, the vagina. Those are the internal genitalia. External genitalia now will comprise of the labia majora, labia minora, the hymen, talk about the urethral opening here, the clitoris. Those are female reproductive system. Now, components in terms of external and internal genitalia. Specific functions for the females. Of course, now the ova will be produced by the ovaries. As we talked about, sperms being produced by the testes in males. Then the female reproductive system receives sperm and allows fertilization. So through the vagina, through the cervix, the uterus, and then the fallopian tube that will have the process of fertilization happening. And then the same female reproductive system through the placenta and through fallopian tube and through the uterus will have supporting implantation and development of the fetus. So implantation happens in the fallopian tube most of the times. And then development of the fetus will happen in the uterus where the placenta develops. And then the female reproductive system enables the process of childbirth and lactation. So that's the female reproductive system. We talked about the male reproductive system. And so we've touched about regional anatomy, each region, starting from upper limb, lower limb, neuroanatomy, head and neck, thorax, abdomen, and perineum. That is regional anatomy. For the systemic anatomy, we talked about the 12 systems. So we started with the skeletal system. Until now, we've covered the reproductive system, that is the male and the female reproductive system. So that's how anatomy is taught in terms of gross anatomy. So when now we go to histology, we've talked about all those organs, all those structures of the system. So if you want to know the microscopic structures, if you want to know the cells, you study that using histology. So cytology, staining of those cells, staining of those tissues, to know the structures, how they look microscopically, that is done under histology. Then to know on how those organs develop, to know on how the bones develop, how the female and the male reproductive system develops, how the liver develops, that is under embryology. And so this video majorly was just an introduction into anatomy, and I hope you've been able to have a glimpse of what anatomy is. And maybe the last bit to mention is that the last function of the female reproductive system is regulation of the menstrual cycle. So the menstrual cycle is regulated by the hormones, the endocrine system. So we talked about luteinizing hormone, talked about follicle stimulating hormone, talked about estrogen and progesterone. So those hormones, they regulate the menstrual cycle. And so you see how now the various systems are interconnected. So the endocrine system is connected to the female reproductive system in that regard. It will also be connected to the digestive system in another regard through the various hormones. So the various organs, the various structures, the various parts of the body, they actually interconnected to work together. So they are harmonized to work together to give a fully functioning body. That is physiology. So physiology is study of body functions, anatomy study of the structure, and that is what we've delved more into. And so I don't know if you have any question. If you have any question, just put it in the chat box. Just to say thank you for your support. And just to mention that, you know, the good work that you've already started in you, just carry it to completion because God is the one who has been able to give you that capacity. So be confident in this, that the one who started the good work in you will carry it to completion. And feel free always to share this, to subscribe and talk to it to your friends. And maybe the last thing that I can talk about in here is that Shailaja in med school or maybe in any medical practice, very happy, very ambitious, but maybe you don't know what you're headed into. But you leave medical school being that way. So mine is to just wish you all the best in your careers, in your studies, in your academics, and just know that for every expert in life feels that with just a single step, and he was a beginner at that expert was once a beginner. So trust the process, be curious, be always wanting to know what is happening in the field of medicine, and also just keep showing up. It will pay off one of these days. So with that, all the best in your academics and in your endeavors. Thank you.